Hello friends, I'm your host Ethan Cole. Here you'll get only the real facts, no rumors, no misinformation, and every story comes backed with proof. Breaking news has taken a very intense turn, and it all begins with Donald Trump giving a fresh interview where he clearly signals military strength. He says that the U.S. has loaded its ships with the most advanced weapons ever made, meaning this situation is not just talk anymore. Real action is being prepared.
Is issuing that stern warning to the regime at this point. Here's also what he has put up on Truth Social. In part, there are reports that Iran is charging fees to tankers going through the Hormuz Strait. They better not be, and if they are, they better stop now, exclamation point. However, Iran's supreme leader is pushing back. Well, you know, the son, Muqtada, who nobody's actually ever verified if he's alive and if he's moving around and all that, since his relatives were all killed, including his Ayatollah father. But anyway, he's quoted to have said, "We are entering a new era with the management of the Strait of Hormuz. We did not and do not seek war, but we will not give up our rightful rights in any way, and for this, we consider all the fronts of resistance."
But this is where the real tension starts. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical oil routes in the world, is now seeing unusual activity. Normally, around 120 to 150 ships pass through daily, but now only a handful are visible. This is a major red alert for global oil supply.
I wonder what he means by that, all the fronts. He's hitting his neighbors, so he doesn't have any friends. Meanwhile, Vice President Vance is expressing optimism ahead of tomorrow's talks.
Looking forward to the negotiation. I think it's going to be positive. We'll, of course, see, as the President of the United States said, if the Iranians are willing to negotiate in good faith, we're certainly willing to extend the open hand. If they're going to try to play us, then they're going to find that the negotiating team is not that receptive. So we're going to try to have a positive negotiation. The President has gave us some pretty clear guidelines, and we're going to see.
But wait, because things escalate even further when Trump issues a direct warning to Iran. Reports suggest Iran may be charging fees to tankers passing through, and Trump's message is clear. If that's happening, stop it immediately.
So the further you are away from your resupply, your beans and bullets and all of that, the harder a sustained effort is. And then you start this war, you're ahead of schedule, and then you realize, okay, all these contingencies for resupply, stopping the fuel, those are falling apart because of European countries afraid to be involved. Okay, now we need to reorient our compass and plan for this. I think it was the Ford we've lost already. So some of these assets that were there in the buildup are leaving. New troops are coming in. I don't think we've seen the end of the bombing campaign. Hopefully we've seen the end of what we call war. We've seen the end of our folks being in tremendous amount of harm's way. But at the end of the day, I mean, go back as far as you want. It's much easier to defend territory than it is to take it. It's much easier to Vietnam, Afghanistan, just in our lifetime. It's just much easier. It's much harder to eliminate threats in Iran than it would be if Iran were trying to attack somewhere else. When you have the defensive position, you don't have to expend all your ammo. You don't have to have more people. And so people talk about, they shot down one of our planes. I thought that we had air superiority. Well, we do, because they're not flying planes. They're not bombing us. What we don't have is the ability to not know that they can do what the Mujahideen did to the Russians. They took cheap shoulder-fired rockets and took enough MiGs and helicopters down that the Russians said, hey, this costs more money than we want to spend on it. We're going to back on out of here.
That is such a great example, too. And just think of how much kinetic activity had happened in Afghanistan, for instance, before we even got involved, right? And they had faced so much, and still we couldn't do it.
And I think what we're seeing right now is that you can't just military your way to a victory. And we've seen over the last 40 years, you can't just diplomacy your way to a victory. It's up to President Trump and his team to learn how to use those two levers together to get to what they consider a victory. And as was outlined a week into the war, the victory was supposed to be, the goals were destroy their Navy, destroy their Air Force, destroy their ability to produce and fire missiles, and take away their ability to go nuclear. So as far as I'm concerned, those are still the four elements of victory. The Strait of Hormuz is not in there.
Now comes the response from the other side. Iran's supreme leader says they do not seek war, but they also have no intention of backing down. And the most important line? We consider all fronts of resistance as one. This is an indirect warning that the conflict could expand.
No, but it's become something that, Rebecca, obviously Iran knows it can use that leverage, because why? Right. Why? Because they're right there. Actually, the waterway doesn't belong to them. It's along their country.
No, it's international. It belongs to all of us and belongs to nobody specifically. And so it's intolerable for the United States' perspective that Iran is going to claim that it can control the Strait of Hormuz. And remember, if Iran is controlling the Strait of Hormuz, that means China is, because China is the biggest backer and gets 90% of Iranian oil goes to China. The other thing I think it's really important, what Joey said is, I think all of this negotiation right now, Vice President Vance going to Pakistan, all he really needs to consider this a success, I think, is to get them to say they're not going to fire into the strait. That's the immediate problem. And I think we're going to then see an international force there escort some oil through the strait.
NATO will get involved?
I think they're going to see I think the Europeans are willing to do it if there's not open hostilities. And so they need to have the confidence that they can do that. And maybe if it's just temporary, get some oil through there. But we're still going to have all these other problems with this rump regime that exists. And then I think Epic Fury resumes in a few weeks, even if we do get some successful, safe travel through the strait.
But I don't understand, Kayleigh, how Europe can sit by and not let us use the airspace and the things that our U.S. military, should we have to re-engage and just protect the strait so that ships can go through. I mean, but they want to benefit from that protection in the strait. So they might take a part via NATO, and Ruta was just here, and so maybe those conversations are happening, the Secretary General of NATO, but they don't want to support what got us to the point where we could keep them from developing nukes.
It's absolutely absurd, and that's why cameras weren't allowed in that room. Rutte and Trump do get along. Typically, there are cameras there, and we see this relationship, but we didn't see it because a hard conversation took place. And I've been in the room with President Trump as he's met with foreign countries and had those hard conversations, and believe me, they look very differently behind the scenes than they look like in front of the cameras, and that's where he gets his leverage. International diplomacy is messy. It's not going to be a clean process. There's a back and forth that takes place, and an added element when you're dealing with a terrorist regime like Iran that cannot be trusted.
But there's another important angle. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance is heading to Islamabad, which means Pakistan is becoming a key hub for these global negotiations. These talks could decide whether the conflict calms down or escalates further.
But I will say this, the negotiators in the room, I've been there with Jared Kushner. He knows what he's doing. He's whip smart. Steve Witkoff, they are responsible for the hostages being released, the Gaza ceasefire. J.D. Vance is a key voice in this. And ultimately, President Trump, the closer who has solved 8 conflicts. This is a hard problem to solve. It has bedeviled every president over the last 47 years. But I like the odds with this president.
Well, and like Joey said, they're using the 2 levers. They've got the diplomacy, and we will use our might. So, Emily, one more point about all this is Israel and its continued battle with Lebanon's terrorist army that sits there. And now the Lebanese want to talk about dismantling that army. I don't know if they can, but that's a sticking point. Iran says Hezbollah has to be able to do what it needs to do against Israel. So that's a war, I guess, that just continues.
Well, I think that underscores that different sovereign entities have different mission objectives, and they have different purposes that they're seeking. If I can just ask you a follow-up real quick. For those that are saying, who are we even negotiating with in Iran or in the Islamic Republic? And secondly, how does that impact all of the proxies that were the source of so much death and destruction?
Experts are also pointing out that this so-called ceasefire doesn't really look like one. Tensions on the ground remain high. War planning, fuel supply, and logistics are all being disrupted.
Is it our Gulf allies that we can rely upon to help manage?
Well, I think that this is a great question, Emily. And one of the things that the U.S. destroyed is command and control. It's the ability of the leaders to be able to communicate to the people in the field. And so that is a problem. And President Trump has said as much. But we do need to get whoever is going to be talking to J.D. Vance needs to say, we are going to call off attacks. There will be no attacks in the Strait of Hormuz. But it is a rump regime. We've taken out over 1,000 IRGC and besieged leaders. So we really have taken out the top leadership in the regime. It's really just a rump regime flailing at this point.
Well, look, last hour we heard with a statement directly from the White House during the Faulkner Focus who would be sitting at the table on our side, Witkoff, Kushner, and Vice President Vance.
And here's a crucial point. You can't win with military force alone. Experts say neither pure military action nor pure diplomacy works on its own. The real challenge is combining both, especially when dealing with an unpredictable opponent like Iran. Now the focus shifts back to the Strait of Hormuz. This isn't just Iran's territory, and it's an international waterway. If Iran controls it, China is indirectly affected too, since it is the largest buyer of Iranian oil. But here's the twist. Experts say the real negotiations happen behind closed doors. What you see on camera is very different from what actually happens inside those rooms. Trump's style is known for this. Calm publicly, but tough in private. And the biggest question right now, who is even negotiating on Iran's behalf? Reports suggest the U.S. has weakened Iran's top leadership, disrupting communication. So it's still unclear who will sit on the other side of the table. Finally, Trump delivers another strong statement, saying Iran has no real leverage except temporary disruption. He adds that the only reason they are still in play is to negotiate. Interview, eh? So right now, the situation is at a critical point. Military pressure on one side, diplomacy on the other, and in the middle, one of the world's most important oil routes. The big question now is, will the talks in Islamabad bring peace, or push the world closer to a larger conflict?